Welcome back to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast, where we like to really dive deep into the heart of Islamic texts and traditions. And today we're going on a pretty fascinating journey, I think, through Muwatta Imam Malik, Book 3, Prayer.
A treasure trove, really, of insights into one of Islam's, well, foundational pillars, you could say.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. What makes this book so special? I know Imam Malik was a prominent scholar, but
Yeah.
how does his perspective on prayer differ from maybe, other scholars?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Imam Malik's Muwatta is known for its focus on the practices of the people of Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad established the first Muslim community.
Right.
It's less about abstract legal arguments and more about grounding those legal principles in the lived experiences of the earliest Muslims.
So it's like a blend of legal rulings and cultural context. It's not just what to do, but how it was actually done by the Prophet and his companions.
Exactly, and that makes it incredibly valuable for understanding the spirit of Islamic law. It's not just a set of rules, but a way of life.
I love that. So where do we begin our deep dive? I'm eager to see what gems we can unearth from this book.
Well, let's start at the very beginning with the call to prayer, or azan.
The Azan.
Mm.
It's such an evocative sound, a call that resonates across time and space. I'm curious to see what the Muwatta reveals about its origins.
Well, the Muwatta opens with a story about how the azan came to be. And it's a story that highlights the role of dreams and divine inspiration in shaping Islamic practices.
Okay, let's hear it. I'm always fascinated by these stories about the early days of Islam. They feel so raw and authentic.
Well, imagine the Prophet Muhammad in the early days of Islam, pondering over the best way to call people to prayer.
Hmm.
He considered using bells, like the Christians, or horns, like the Jews, but neither felt quite right.
So he was exploring different options, trying to find something that resonated with the spirit of Islam.
Yes. And then one of his companions, Abdullah ibn Zayd al-Ansari, had a vivid dream. And in this dream, an angel appeared before him, holding two pieces of wood, and instructing him to call to prayer in a specific manner.
Wow, that's a pretty direct message. It's like the answer was literally delivered in a dream.
It is, and it speaks to the importance of dreams and their interpretation in early Islamic history. It wasn't just about personal revelation, it was about seeking guidance for the community.
So Abdullah shared his dream with the Prophet.
He did, and the Prophet immediately recognized it as divine inspiration. He instructed Abdullah to teach Bilal, known for his beautiful voice, the words and melody of the azan.
And that's how the Azan we hear today came to be. It's incredible to think that such a foundational practice originated from a dream.
It is, and the Muwatta emphasizes the significance of the azan, not just as a call to prayer, but as a powerful declaration of faith. It quotes the Prophet Muhammad saying that those who hear the azan, even if they aren't Muslim, will bear witness for the muadhin on the Day of Judgment.
So the Azan's impact extends beyond the Muslim community. It's a testament to the universality of its message.
Exactly. It's a call that transcends boundaries and speaks to the inherent human longing for connection with the divine.
And practically speaking, how are Muslims supposed to respond when they hear the Azan? Is it just about stopping what you're doing and heading to the mosque?
Well, the Muwatta outlines a beautiful etiquette for responding to the azan. It encourages Muslims to repeat the words of the azan, phrase by phrase, as a way of affirming the message and connecting with the community of believers.
So it's not just about listening passively, it's about actively engaging with the words and their meaning.
Yes, and it's about cultivating a sense of unity and shared purpose. When you hear the azan, you're reminded that you're not alone in your journey. You're part of a global community united by faith.
That's such a powerful image. It's like the Azan weaves a tapestry of faith across continents, connecting hearts and minds.
Beautifully put. And the Muwatta also emphasizes the importance of approaching prayer with the right mindset.
Okay, so what does that mean? Is it just about being on time and facing the right direction?
It's about so much more than that. The Muwatta recounts a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad advised his companions not to rush to prayer when they hear the iqama, the second call that signals the immediate start of prayer.
So it's not about frantically scrambling to get to the mosque.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of tranquility and presence. The Prophet encouraged his companions to approach prayer with calmness, serenity, taking a moment to transition from the busyness of life into a state of mindful worship.
It's like creating a sacred pause, a space between the world and your prayer.
Yes, it's about leaving behind the distractions and anxieties of daily life and entering into a state of communion with the divine.
That makes so much sense. It's about shifting your focus From the external to the internal, from the mundane to the sacred.
Beautifully put. And it's not always easy to do. The Muwatta actually acknowledges the challenges we face in maintaining that focus, both external and internal.
So what does it say about these challenges? I'm curious to see how the Muwatta addresses the very human struggle of, staying focused during prayer.
Well, it talks about how Shaitan, the embodiment of temptation and distraction, tries to disrupt our prayers, particularly during the Azhan and the Iqama.
Oh, wow. So it's like a spiritual battle is taking place.
You could say that. The Muwatta depicts prayer as a form of resistance against those forces that seek to pull us away from God. It's about consciously choosing to align ourselves with the divine, even when distractions abound.
That's a powerful way to look at it. It makes prayer feel more active, more intentional.
Exactly. It's not just about going through the motions, it's about engaging in a conscious act of surrender and devotion. And the Muwatta highlights moments of spiritual opportunity within the Azan. It mentions that one of the times when supplications are most likely to be answered is during the Azan.
Really? So it's a time to make specific requests or prayers.
Yes. It's seen as a moment when the heavens are open and our connection with the divine is particularly strong.
That's beautiful. It's like the Azan creates a portal to the divine, a space where our prayers can ascend with ease.
It's a beautiful image, and it speaks to the power of ritual and intention in shaping our spiritual experiences.
Okay, so we've explored the origins of the Azan, the etiquette of responding to it, the importance of approaching prayer with the right mindset, and even the spiritual battles that can take place during the Azan. Is there anything else we should know about this essential call to prayer?
Oh, there are so many fascinating details. For example, the phrase, prayer is better than sleep, which is now such an iconic part of the Dawn Azan, wasn't originally there. It was added later, during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Wait, really? I always thought that phrase was part of the original Azan. Tell me the story behind its addition.
It's a great story. Apparently, Bilal, the Prophet's muadhin, went to wake Umar ibn al-Khattab for the Fajr prayer, the pre-dawn prayer, and found him sleeping soundly. So Bilal spontaneously uttered the phrase, prayer is better than sleep, to rouse him.
So it was a spur-of-the-moment inspiration.
Yes. And Umar was so struck by the phrase that he instructed Bilal to incorporate it into the Dawn Azan. It became a gentle reminder to the community, urging them to prioritize prayer even when sleep beckoned.
It's amazing how a spontaneous utterance can become such an integral part of a ritual.
It is. And it speaks to the dynamic nature of Islamic tradition. It wasn't just about rigid adherence to a set form. It was about adapting and evolving to meet the needs of the community.
And does the Muwatta say anything about how the Azan has been preserved over time? Has it remained unchanged since those early days?
There's a powerful quote from Abdullah ibn Umar, a companion of the Prophet, where he describes the Azan as one of the few practices that has remained untouched since the time of the Prophet. He considered it a precious link to that sacred past, a testament to the continuity of Islamic tradition.
It's amazing how something so ancient can still feel so relevant and powerful today.
It is. And the Muwatta doesn't just describe the Azan, it delves into the specifics of its application in various contexts, like during travel or when someone is without wudu, the ritual ablution before prayer.
So it's not just a theoretical concept, it's a practical guide for everyday life.
Exactly. It addresses the real-world situations that Muslims face and offers guidance based on scholarly interpretation and the lived experiences of the early Muslim community.
I'm really impressed by the depth and practicality of this book. It's not just about abstract principles, it's about applying those principles to the messy realities of life.
And that's what makes it so valuable. It's a living tradition, not a museum piece. So let's explore these practical considerations. The Muwatta explains that on a journey, one has the option to call both the Azan and the Iqma, or just the Iqma.
So it's about making prayer accessible, even when you're away from home at a mosque.
Precisely. It's about adapting the ritual to different contexts without compromising its essence.
That's really thoughtful. Are there any other examples of this flexibility in the Muwatta?
There's a beautiful story about Abdullah ibn Umar, who was known for his, meticulous adherence to the Prophet's sunnah, his way of life. One cold night while traveling, he added the phrase, pray in shelter, to the Azan.
Wait, he added a phrase to the Azan. I thought it was supposed to be recited in a specific way.
It is, but Abdullah explained that he was following the Prophet's instruction to advise people to pray in their homes when the weather was harsh. He adapted the Azan to convey that message to the community.
That's incredible. It shows a real sensitivity to the needs of the people. and a willingness to adapt the ritual without compromising its core message.
Exactly. And there's another intriguing hadith in the Muwatta about the reward for praying in desolate areas. It mentions that angels pray with those who pray in such places.
So even when you're far from civilization, you're not truly alone in your prayers.
Yes. It's like a reminder that God's presence is everywhere, and that our efforts to connect with Him, even in challenging circumstances, are acknowledged and honored.
That's incredibly comforting. It's like a spiritual safety net, knowing that you're supported even in the most desolate of places.
And speaking of practical matters, the Muwatta also clarifies the timing of the pre-dawn meal, or su, in relation to the azan, something particularly relevant during Ramadan.
Ah, yes. That's a question I've always had. How do you know when it's time to stop eating before the fast begins?
The Muwatta explains that there were actually two azans at dawn. The first one, called by Bilal, was while it was still dark, and you could continue eating and drinking until the second azan, called by Ibn Maktum, which signaled the arrival of dawn.
Okay, so it was crucial to pay attention to which azan you were hearing, especially if you were trying to finish your suhoor.
Absolutely. And there's an interesting detail about Ibn Maktum that highlights the importance of accuracy. He was blind, so he needed someone to confirm that dawn had truly arrived before calling the second azan.
So there was a system of checks and balances to ensure accuracy even in those early days. It shows how seriously they took the timing of prayer and fasting.
It does. And this distinction between the two azans is further emphasized in another section of the Muwatta. It delves into the details of how Ibn Maktum, being blind, would rely on confirmation from others to ensure he called the azan at the precise moment of dawn.
It's like a testament to their commitment to precision and their recognition that even seemingly small details matter when it comes to worship.
Exactly. And speaking of details, the Muwatta then moves on to discuss the opening of the prayer. And there's quite a bit to unpack there.
Okay, lead the way. I am eager to see what insights the Muwatta offers on how to begin our prayers with the right intention and focus.
Well, it starts by addressing the practice of raising your hands during prayer, which seems to have generated some discussion even among the early Muslims. There are different narrations about the positioning of the hands and whether it was done at specific points in the prayer.
So there was some variation in how people did it.
Yes. The Muwatta doesn't shy away from acknowledging these variations. It mentions that some people raise their hands to their ears, others to their shoulders, and some even raise their hands only at the beginning of the prayer.
So was there a correct way to do it?
Well, the Muwatta does offer clarification. It mentions that the Prophet Muhammad used to raise his hands to shoulder level when beginning the prayer and when raising his head from the bowing position.
So that's the practice that many Muslims follow today.
Yes. It's considered the preferred practice, based on the Prophet's example. And another important element of the prayer's opening is the phrase Allahu Akbar, meaning God is greater, also known as the takbir.
Right? The takbir. It's such a powerful declaration, a recognition of God's greatness and our own humility.
Exactly. And the Muwatta specifies that this phrase is recited when transitioning between standing, bowing, and prostrating, marking each movement in the prayer with this affirmation of God's majesty.
It's like punctuating the prayer with these declarations of surrender and awe.
Yes. It's about consciously shifting our focus from the world around us to the divine presence within and beyond. And the Muwatta doesn't just describe the ideal scenario. It also addresses those moments when we falter, when we make mistakes or forget things.
That's reassuring. We all make mistakes, especially when we're trying to concentrate during prayer. It's comforting to know that there's guidance for those moments.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging our human imperfections and offering solutions within the framework of the ritual.
So what happens if you join a prayer that's already in progress? Do you just jump in wherever they are?
The Muwatta clarifies that you should still say Allahu Akbar when joining the prayer, even if you're catching up.
So it signifies your intention to join the prayer no matter where it's at.
Precisely. It's about aligning yourself with the collective rhythm of the prayer. And what's interesting is that the Muwatta even addresses what to do if you forget the opening takbir altogether.
Well, that's handy. What does it say?
It says that if you're praying by yourself and forget the opening takbir, you should start your prayer afresh. It's about ensuring that the prayer is performed correctly from the very beginning.
Makes sense. But what if you're praying with an imam?
Imam Malik, the author of the Muwatta, had a specific opinion on this. He said that if the person praying behind the imam forgets the opening takbir, they can make it up by saying it during the first bowing.
So there's a bit of leeway there.
Yes, but there's a catch. It only counts if they intended for that takbir to also signify the opening takbir. It's all about the intention.
Wow, so even in a moment of forgetfulness, your intention still holds weight. That's deep. But what if the imam forgets the opening takbir? What happens then?
According to Imam Malik, if the imam realizes his mistake before proceeding too far into the prayer, he should repeat the entire prayer, including the opening takbir, and those praying behind him should follow suit. However, if the imam has already completed a significant portion of the prayer, he can simply continue, and those praying behind him should follow his lead.
So the entire congregation is affected by the imam's actions.
Yes, it highlights the shared responsibility and interconnectedness of prayer.
That's amazing. It's like the whole congregation is on this journey together, supporting each other, even through moments of forgetfulness.
Precisely.
Hmm.
It emphasizes the community aspect of prayer and the importance of following the imam's guidance.
This is fascinating. So we've covered the call to prayer and the opening of the prayer. What's next on our deep dive into the Muwatta?
Well, the next section focuses on the recitation of the Quran during prayer, specifically the Maghrib and Isha prayers. It delves into the specific chapters the Prophet Muhammad was known to recite and provides insights into the practices of his companions.
Okay, sounds like we're about to get even deeper into the heart of the prayer.
Yeah.
Lead the way.
Let's do it. And the Muwatta offers a glimpse into the Prophet's personal prayer practice, which is something many Muslims find deeply inspiring.
I can imagine. It's like connecting with the Prophet across time and space.
Exactly. And it's not just about imitating his actions, it's about understanding the spirit and intention behind them.
Okay, so what specific chapters did the Prophet recite during these prayers? I'm eager to learn more about his choices.
Well, for the Maghrib prayer, which is performed right after sunset, the Muwatta mentions the Prophet reciting Surah At-Tur, a powerful chapter that speaks about the Day of Judgment and the signs of God's power in creation.
It's interesting that he chose a chapter that focuses on the afterlife. It's like a reminder that prayer is not just about this world, but about preparing for the next.
Exactly. And the Muwatta also shares accounts of the Prophet reciting other chapters during Maghrib, such as Surah Al-Mushalat, which describes the sending down of angels and the events of the Day of Judgment, and Surah Al-Qariyah, which vividly portrays the calamities of that day.
So there was a thematic consistency in his choices, a focus on reminding the believers of the ultimate reality.
Yes. It's about grounding our earthly lives in the context of eternity.
That's profound. Okay, what about the Isha prayer? Did the Prophet have a preferred chapter for that prayer as well?
According to Al-Bara ibn Azib, a companion of the Prophet recited Surah At-Tin, a chapter that emphasizes God's creation of humankind in the best of forms, during the Isha prayer, which is performed at night.
It's interesting that he chose a chapter that highlights human potential and the divine nature of our creation for the nighttime prayer.
It is. It's like a reminder to reflect on our purpose and our relationship with God before we surrender to sleep.
Okay, so we have specific examples of chapters that the Prophet recited for these two prayers. That's pretty amazing. It gives us a tangible connection to his practice and helps us understand the importance he placed on specific parts of the Quran.
Absolutely. And the Muwatta doesn't stop there. It also delves into the manner in which the Quran should be recited during prayer, offering valuable insights into the etiquette and behavior surrounding this central act of worship.
I'm really curious to hear more about this. I know there are guidelines about the volume of recitation and certain postures to avoid, but I'd love to get a deeper understanding of the reasoning behind those guidelines.
Well, let's start with a hadith that specifically forbids reciting the Quran while bowing. It emphasizes that the bowing position is a posture of humility and submission, where our focus should be on glorifying God and acknowledging our dependence on Him rather than on reciting His words.
So it's about aligning our physical posture with our inner state of being. It's not just about saying the right words, it's about embodying the spirit of submission.
Exactly. And the Muwatta also provides guidance on the volume of recitation. It quotes the Prophet Muhammad advising against reciting too loudly during prayer.
That makes sense. I've always been taught that prayer is a personal conversation with God, a moment of intimacy and connection.
Precisely. It's not a performance for others, but an intimate dialogue between the soul and its creator. The Muwatta emphasizes the importance of focusing on the meaning of the words, contemplating their wisdom, and allowing them to penetrate our hearts.
It's about internalizing the message, not just vocalizing the sounds.
Exactly. And speaking of vocalization, the Muwatta shared a fascinating detail about the phrase, "in the name of Allah," also known as the Bismillah, which is typically recited at the beginning of every chapter of the Quran.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does it say about the Bismillah? I've always recited it out loud at the start of every chapter during prayer.
Well, it mentions that Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, the first three caliphs, did not recite the Bismillah aloud at the beginning of their prayers.
Really? So it wasn't a standard practice back then.
It seems there was some variation in practice, but the Muwatta doesn't go into detail about why they chose to recite it silently. Some scholars suggest that it might have been a way of emphasizing the unity and flow of the prayer, avoiding any interruptions between the opening takbir and the recitation of Surah al-Fatiha.
That's interesting. It's like they were prioritizing the seamlessness of the prayer, avoiding any breaks in the flow of devotion.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even in the early days of Islam, there were different interpretations and approaches to certain aspects of prayer.
It highlights the dynamic nature of Islamic jurisprudence and how scholars have always grappled with these questions of interpretation, seeking to balance tradition with evolving contexts.
Absolutely. And the Muwatta encourages us to engage in this ongoing conversation, to seek understanding, and to strive for excellence in our worship while respecting the diversity of opinions within the Islamic tradition.
Okay, so no reciting while bowing, keep the volume moderate, and the Bismillah might be silent or recited softly. Any other interesting practices related to recitation during prayer?
Well, there are a couple of fascinating anecdotes about the companions' practices. The Muwatta mentions Abdullah ibn Umar, who was known for his meticulous adherence to the Prophet's sunnah. If he happened to join a prayer in progress and missed some of the recitation, he would stand up after the imam finished and recite the verses he had missed aloud to himself.
So he was making a conscious effort to complete the recitation, even if he joined late. It shows a real dedication to honoring the Quran.
It does. And then there's this other story about a companion named Nafi ibn Jubayr. Apparently, he would nudge the person next to him during prayer to prompt him.
Wait, seriously? He was asking for help during the prayer.
It seems so. The Muwatta doesn't specify what he needed help with, but it suggests that it was acceptable to seek assistance if needed during prayer.
That's pretty cool. It makes prayer feel a little more human and relatable. It's
Right.
not about pretending to be perfect. It's about acknowledging our need for support and guidance.
Exactly. And speaking of guidance, the Muwatta then shifts its focus to the Fajr prayer, the pre-dawn prayer, highlighting the lengthy recitations of the early caliphs.
Okay, let's hear about it. I'm always amazed by stories of the early Muslims' dedication to prayer. They set such a high bar for us to aspire to.
Get ready to be amazed. The Muwatta shares accounts of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman reciting incredibly long chapters during the Fajr prayer, demonstrating their deep reverence for the Quran and their commitment to starting their day immersed in its words.
Like, how long are we talking?
For instance, there's a story about Abu Bakr reciting Surah al-Baqarah, the longest chapter in the Quran, during the 2 units of the Fajr prayer.
Wow, that's intense. It must have taken a considerable amount of time. I can only imagine the level of focus and devotion that required.
It's truly inspiring. It wasn't just about fulfilling an obligation, it was about experiencing the beauty and power of God's word.
Did the other caliphs also recite lengthy chapters?
Yes. The Muwatta mentions Umar ibn al-Khattab reciting Surah Yusuf and Surah al-Hajj, 2 chapters known for their rich narratives and profound lessons, during the Fajr prayer.
It must have been quite a spiritual experience for those praying behind him, hearing those chapters recited with such devotion.
It must have been. And then there's Uthman ibn Affan, who was known for reciting Surah Yusuf so many times during the Fajr prayer that one of the people praying behind him remarked that he had memorized the entire chapter just by listening to Uthman's recitation.
That's amazing. It speaks to the power of repetition and the impact of hearing the Quran recited beautifully.
Exactly. It wasn't just about reading the words, it was about experiencing them, contemplating them, and letting them penetrate their hearts. And the Muwatta also highlights the practice of Abdullah ibn Umar, who consistently recited the first 10 chapters of the Quran during Fajr.
Okay, so that's still pretty lengthy, but it's interesting that it differed from the caliph's practice.
It is, and it shows that there was a range of acceptable practice within Islam. While the caliph's recitations were incredibly long, Abdullah ibn Umar's practice was still considered commendable and within the bounds of Islamic tradition.
It's like they were all striving for excellence, each in their own way, while still upholding the core principles of the faith.
Exactly. And speaking of essential principles, the Muwatta then moves on to discuss the significance of Surah al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, often referred to as the mother of the book.
Ah, Surah al-Fatiha. It's the heartbeat of the prayer recited in every single unit. What does the Muwatta say about its significance?
Well, the Muwatta shares a powerful hadith where the Prophet Muhammad reveals to Ubay ibn Ka'b, one of his companions, the extraordinary significance of Surah Al-Fatiha. He refers to it as the seven oft repeated, alluding to its recitation in every unit of prayer, and the Great Quran, signifying its encompassing nature.
Wow, those are some weighty titles. It really emphasizes the centrality of this chapter within Islam.
It does, and it speaks to the profound wisdom and beauty contained within its verses. It's a distillation of the Quran's core message, encapsulating themes of divine unity, guidance, and submission.
So it's not just a chapter, it's a microcosm of the entire Quran.
You could say that. It's so essential that the Muwatta explicitly states that a prayer without reciting Surah Al-Fatiha is considered incomplete.
So it's non-negotiable. It has to be there in every prayer.
Yes. It's the foundation upon which the rest of the prayer is built. And the Muwatta doesn't stop at highlighting its importance. It also delves into a discussion about whether you should recite Surah Al-Fatiha behind the Imam, especially when the Imam isn't reciting aloud.
Ah, that's a good question. I've always wondered about that. What's the verdict? Should you or shouldn't you?
Well, the Muwatta presents different opinions on this matter, even amongst the companions of the Prophet, which is something we see quite often in these early texts.
Really? So there's no one definitive answer?
It seems like there wasn't a universally agreed upon practice in the early days. The Muwatta shares a hadith where Abu Huraira, a close companion of the Prophet, was specifically told to recite Surah Al-Fatiha even when praying behind the Imam.
Okay, so that's one side of the argument. What about the other side?
Abdullah ibn Umar, another prominent companion, known for his meticulous adherence to the Prophet's Sunnah, believed that the Imam's recitation was sufficient and that those praying behind him didn't need to recite Surah Al-Fatiha themselves.
So two different companions, two different viewpoints. That's fascinating. It shows that even in those early days, there was room for different interpretations.
Exactly. And the Muwatta doesn't shy away from presenting these differing opinions. It encourages us to engage with the complexity of Islamic jurisprudence and to recognize that there isn't always a single right way to do things.
Okay, so we have these two differing viewpoints. Does the Muwatta offer any insights into the reasoning behind them? Like, why did Abu Huraira believe it was necessary to recite Surah Al-Fatiha even behind the Imam?
Well, the hadith mentioning Abu Huraira includes a beautiful analogy. It describes a conversation between God and his servant during prayer.
For conversation during prayer, what do you mean?
It's a metaphorical representation of the exchange that takes place during prayer. When the servant recites Surah Al-Fatiha, it's seen as part of this dialogue with God, a direct address from the heart to the divine.
So even though you're praying behind the Imam, you're still engaging in a personal conversation with God through Surah Al-Fatiha.
That's the idea. It emphasizes that prayer is not just about listening to the Imam, it's about your own individual connection with the divine.
That's beautiful. It adds another layer of meaning to the prayer, a personal connection that runs alongside the collective one.
And what's interesting is that the Muwatta also mentions other companions like Hisham ibn Urwa and Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad who followed Abu Huraira's practice and recited Surah Al-Fatiha behind the Imam.
So it seems like there was a diversity of practice even amongst the companions. It wasn't a clear-cut black and white issue.
Exactly. And Imam Malik himself, the author of the Muwatta, considered reciting Surah Al-Fatiha behind the Imam when he wasn't reciting aloud to be the preferred practice.
So he leaned towards Abu Huraira's side of the argument.
He did. But it's crucial to remember that he acknowledged the validity of both viewpoints, recognizing that there was room for differing opinions within the framework of Islamic law.
Okay, so we've established that there were different opinions on reciting Surah Al-Fatiha behind the Imam when he wasn't reciting aloud. But what about when the Imam is reciting aloud? Does the Muwatta address that scenario as well?
It does. And as you might expect, there's guidance for that situation too.
I'm not surprised. Okay, tell me, what does it say?
In this scenario, the Muwatta sides with Abdullah ibn Umar's viewpoint. It states that when the Imam is reciting aloud, those praying behind him should refrain from reciting Surah Al-Fatiha along with him.
Okay, that makes sense. It would be pretty chaotic if everyone was reciting aloud at the same time. And it would be hard to focus on the Imam's recitation if you were trying to recite along with him.
Exactly. And the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad expressed concern about being distracted by someone reciting along with him is often cited as evidence for this practice.
It's about maintaining order and focus during congregational prayer, allowing the Imam's voice to guide the collective rhythm of worship.
Beautifully put. It's about surrendering to the collective flow of the prayer, allowing the imam's voice to lead you through the spiritual journey.
That's such a powerful image. Okay, so we've covered the call to prayer.
The opening of the prayer, the recitation during Maghrib and Isha, the etiquette of recitation, the importance of Surah Al-Fatiha, and the differing opinions on reciting behind the imam. That's a lot of ground we've covered.
It is, and the Muwatta doesn't stop there. It continues to delve into the finer points of prayer, offering guidance on everything from proper posture to dealing with moments of forgetfulness.
Now I'm ready to dive deeper. What's next on our exploration of prayer? The next section focuses on something that I'm sure many of us can relate to, saying Amin behind the imam.
Ah, yes, Amin. That little word that packs a lot of spiritual punch. I'm curious to see what the Muwatta reveals about its significance.
It's more than just a simple affirmation. The Muwatta actually connects it to divine forgiveness and the presence of angels during prayer.
Whoa, that sounds deep. I'm ready to dive in. Tell me more.
Well, the book highlights the spiritual weight of saying Amin, emphasizing that it's not just an automatic response. It's an act that can bring us closer to God's mercy.
Okay, so it's not just something you do without thinking.
Yeah.
It's an act that carries spiritual weight.
Exactly. There are several hadiths in this section that emphasize the virtue of saying Amin after the imam, and they're filled with beautiful imagery and profound meaning.
I'm always fascinated by those glimpses into the unseen realm. Okay, give me an example. What kind of imagery are we talking about?
One of the hadiths speaks of a synchronization with the angelic realm. It mentions that those whose Amin coincides with the Amin of the angels will have their past sins forgiven.
Wow, so it's like our voices are joining with the chorus of angels, a symphony of praise and supplication rising up to heaven.
It's a beautiful image, isn't it? It reminds us that we're not alone in our prayers. We're surrounded by a world of unseen beings, all engaged in glorifying and praising God.
It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Okay.
So timing seems to be important here. Does the Muwatta offer any specifics about when to say Amin during the prayer?
Absolutely. The Muwatta leaves no room for ambiguity when it comes to such important details. One hadith states that you should say Amin immediately after the imam finishes reciting the last verse of Surah Al-Fatiha.
And just to be clear, that's after the phrase, not of those with whom you were angry, nor of those who are astray.
You got it. It's like the Amin seals the prayer, affirming our agreement with the words we've just recited.
It's fascinating how much emphasis is placed on the timing and wording of these actions during prayer. It shows the precision and intentionality woven into Islamic rituals.
It's not just about going through the motions. It's about performing each action with awareness and purpose, aligning our hearts and minds with the words we utter. And speaking of specific phrases, there's another instance where the Muwatta guides us on what to say and when to say it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
There's a hadith that instructs us to say a particular phrase after the imam says, Allah hears whoever praises him. Do you know which phrase I'm talking about?
I think you do. It's, O Allah, our Lord, praise be to you, right?
That's the one. And the Muwatta links this phrase just like saying amen to the forgiveness of sins. It's a powerful declaration of God's attributes and an expression of our gratitude.
It's beautiful how even these seemingly small phrases within the prayer are imbued with such profound meaning. It makes you want to pay attention to every word, every gesture, knowing that each one has the potential to draw us closer to God.
It's a reminder that prayer is not just about reciting words, it's about embodying those words, allowing them to shape our hearts and minds.
Okay, so we've explored the significance of saying im behind the imam and the importance of those small but mighty phrases that punctuate our prayers. What comes next in the Muwatta's exploration of prayer?
The next section focuses on the sitting position in prayer, particularly during the tashahhud, which is that moment of stillness and reflection where we recite a specific set of phrases affirming our faith and sending blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad.
Ah, the tashahhud. I've always found that moment in the prayer to be particularly moving. It's like a pause in the midst of the flowing movements, a time to gather our thoughts and reaffirm our connection with God and his messenger.
Beautifully said. And the Muwatta provides detailed descriptions of how the Prophet and his companions sat during this pivotal moment, highlighting the importance of proper posture and mindful presence.
Okay, so what's the ideal posture? I'm always trying to make sure I'm doing it correctly, aligning my body with the spirit of the prayer.
The Muwatta describes the Prophet Muhammad placing his right hand on his right thigh, making a gentle fist with his fingers and pointing his index finger upwards. His left hand rested gracefully on his left thigh, grounding him in the moment.
Okay, so the hand placement is very specific. What about the feet? Is there a prescribed way to position them during the tashahhud?
Interestingly, there are a few different narrations about foot placement, and it seems there was some variation even amongst the companions.
Really? So, no single right way. That's surprising.
It is. It suggests that there was a degree of flexibility in the early days as long as the overall posture conveyed respect and humility. The Muwatta does mention that Abdullah ibn Umar, known for his meticulous adherence to the Prophet's sunnah, would keep his right foot upright, symbolizing strength and steadfastness, and lay his left foot flat on the ground, representing humility and surrender.
So that's one way. Were there any other common practices mentioned?
Yes, some people would cross their legs during the sitting position, finding comfort and ease in that posture. However, Abdullah ibn Umar discouraged this, believing that the Prophet's way was to keep the right foot upright.
It seems like he was pretty particular about following the Prophet's example, even the smallest details. It shows how deeply he revered the Prophet in his teachings.
He was, and it highlights the importance that the early Muslims placed on preserving the Prophet's way of praying, seeing it as a direct link to the divine revelation.
It's a beautiful way to honor that legacy, to embody the spirit of the Prophet's practice.
And it's important to note that the Muwatta acknowledges that there may be exceptions for those who have difficulty sitting in the prescribed manner due to illness or physical limitations.
So it's not about rigid adherence to a form, but about adapting the practice to individual circumstances, ensuring that everyone can experience the beauty and peace of prayer.
Exactly. The emphasis is on sincerity and reverence regardless of physical ability. And speaking of reverence, the Muwatta then moves on to the specific phrases recited during the tashahhud, presenting different versions that were prevalent among the early Muslims.
Oh, really? I thought there was just one standard tashahhud. I'm curious to hear about these variations.
It seems like there was a degree of flexibility in how the tashahhud was recited, even amongst prominent figures like Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph, and Aisha, the Prophet's wife.
Wow, that's interesting. It challenges our assumptions about a singular, correct way of praying. It suggests a richness and diversity of expression within the early Muslim community.
Exactly. It reminds us that Islam is a living tradition, and its rituals have always been interpreted and practiced in a variety of ways.
Okay, I'm ready to delve into these different versions. Let's start with Umar ibn al-Khattab. What was his version of the tashahhud?
The Muwatta records Umar's version as follows. Greetings belong to Allah. Pure actions belong to Allah. Good words and prayers belong to Allah. Peace on you, Prophet, and the mercy of Allah and His blessings. Peace be upon us and on the slaves of Allah who are righteous. I testify that there is no God except Allah, and I testify that Muhammad is His slave and His messenger.
It's beautiful how it encompasses so much in such a short space, acknowledging God's attributes, sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet, and reaffirming the core tenets of Islamic belief.
It's a powerful declaration of faith and a moment of deep connection with the divine.
Okay, so that's Umar's version. What about Aisha's version? How did it differ?
Aisha's version, as recorded in the Muwatta, is remarkably similar, but with subtle variations in wording that reflect her unique understanding and expression. For example, she includes the phrase, good words before prayers, suggesting a broader understanding of the types of communication that belong to God. And she uses the phrase, peace be upon you, twice, once at the beginning and once at the end, emphasizing the importance of peace and blessings in our relationship with the Prophet.
It's those subtle differences that fascinate me. They offer a glimpse into the hearts and minds of those who lived alongside the Prophet, how they interpreted his teachings and integrated them into their personal practice.
Exactly. And the Muwatta also includes Abdullah ibn Umar's method of reciting the tashahhud, which incorporated additional supplications and variations in wording, reflecting his deep piety and desire to connect with God in a multifaceted way.
It's remarkable how the Muwatta presents this tapestry of practices without imposing a rigid uniformity. It allows for diversity of expression within the framework of the ritual, acknowledging that there are multiple paths to connect with the divine.
And it encourages us as Muslims today to approach our prayers with that same spirit of reverence and flexibility, finding the expressions that resonate most deeply within our own hearts.
Okay, so we've got Umar's version, Aisha's version, and Abdullah ibn Umar's unique approach to the tashahhud. It's fascinating to see how these variations reflect the richness and diversity of the early Muslim community.
And the Muwatta reminds us that this diversity is not a source of division, but a testament to the beauty of Islam, its ability to encompass a multitude of perspectives while still upholding the core principles of faith.
And speaking of holding principles, the Muwatta also addresses what to do if you join the prayer midway through and need to catch up on the missed units. It can be a bit confusing trying to figure out how to synchronize your prayer with the rest of the congregation.
It can be. And the Muwatta offers clear guidance on how to navigate those situations, ensuring that you maintain the flow and harmony of the prayer without causing unnecessary disruption.
Okay, so what's the protocol? Do you just stand up and start praying from the beginning?
The Muwatta clarifies that if you join the prayer while the congregation is in a standing position, you should stand with them and complete the unit you've joined, even if it means reciting a shorter chapter than you normally would. Once the imam concludes that unit with the bowing, you can then make up for any missed units by standing up and completing them after the imam has finished the prayer.
So you're basically joining the flow of the prayer, aligning yourself with the congregation's rhythm, and then making up for any missed units later.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing unity and avoiding any actions that might distract others from their prayer.
It's like a dance, isn't it? A synchronized flow of movements and recitations, each individual contributing to the collective harmony.
It is, and the Muwatta guides us on how to join that dance gracefully, even if we arrive late.
Okay, so that's how you handle joining the prayer while they're standing. What about if they're in the sitting position reciting the tashahhud? Do you sit down with them and then make up the missed units?
That's a great question. And the Muwatta addresses that scenario as well. It advises that if you join the prayer while the congregation is in the sitting position, you should stand up and complete the units you've missed. Once you've caught up, you can then join them in the sitting position for the final tashahhud.
That makes sense. It would be awkward if you were the only one standing while everyone else was sitting. It would break the flow of the prayer.
Exactly. The focus is on maintaining the flow and harmony of the prayer, respecting the collective experience of the congregation.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit about the sitting position in prayer, the ideal posture, the different versions of the tashahhud, and even how to handle joining the prayer midway through. What's next on our deep dive into the Muwatta?
The next section deals with a rather specific scenario, but one that many of us have probably experienced at some point: what to do if you accidentally raise your head before the imam during bowing or prostration.
Oh, I've definitely done that before. It's so embarrassing, especially when you realize everyone else is still down and you're the only one sticking out like a sore thumb. What does the Muwatta say you should do in that situation?
It emphasizes the importance of following the imam's lead, even when you've made a mistake. So if you happen to raise your head prematurely, the correct course of action is to return to the bowing or prostrating position immediately and not wait for the imam to come up.
So basically, just fix the mistake as soon as you realize it. It's about humility and recognizing that the imam is leading the prayer.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the error and immediately aligning yourself with the imam's movements, demonstrating your willingness to follow his guidance.
It's a physical manifestation of humility, isn't it? You're submitting to the guidance of the imam even when you've messed up.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And there's actually a hadith that connects this action to shaitan's influence, adding another layer of meaning to this seemingly small gesture.
Really? Tell me more. I'm always fascinated by these glimpses into the spiritual realm.
The hadith states that anyone who raises their head before the imam has their forelock in the hand of shaitan, suggesting that this seemingly insignificant mistake is a manifestation of spiritual distraction.
Whoa, that's intense. It's like Shaitan is trying to disrupt the harmony of the prayer to pull our attention away from God.
You could interpret it that way. It's a reminder that prayer is not just a physical act. It's a spiritual battle against distractions and temptations.
It makes you realize the importance of staying focused and present during prayer, recognizing that every movement, every gesture is an opportunity to strengthen our connection with the divine and resist those forces that seek to pull us away.
Precisely. And the Muwatta delves deeper into the theme of distractions during prayer, offering guidance on how to handle those moments when our minds wander or external factors try to steal our attention.
Well, that's so relatable. I know I've been distracted by things during prayer, both internal and external. It's hard to completely shut out the world, even for a few minutes.
It is. But the Muwatta offers some practical advice and inspiring stories about how the Prophet Muhammad and his companions dealt with these very human challenges.
Okay, I'm all ears. I'm ready to learn from the best.
Oh.
What does the Muwatta say about dealing with distractions?
It shares a couple of fascinating stories about the Prophet Muhammad being distracted during prayer and how he responded with humility and a desire to maintain the purity of his worship.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me the stories. They always offer such valuable insights into the human side of faith.
One story involves the Prophet receiving a beautiful striped garment as a gift. He wore it during prayer, but afterwards he asked for the garment to be returned, explaining that the stripes had distracted him while praying, pulling his attention away from his conversation with God.
Wow, so even something as seemingly innocuous as a striped garment could be a distraction during prayer. It shows how sensitive he was to anything that might hinder his focus and devotion.
It does. It highlights the importance of creating a conducive environment for prayer free from unnecessary distractions.
And it's not just about visual distractions, right? The mind can wander even in the quietest of spaces.
Exactly. And there's another story in the Muwatta that illustrates this point beautifully. It's about Abu Talha, a companion of the Prophet who was praying in his garden when he became captivated by a pigeon trying to find its way out.
That sounds kind of sweet. It's like his compassion for the little bird momentarily eclipsed his focus on prayer.
It was. But Abu Talha, realizing that his attention had shifted away from his prayer, felt a sense of unease. He ended up donating his garden as a charitable act, believing that it had become a source of distraction for him.
Wow, that's a pretty drastic response.
Yeah.
But it shows how seriously he took the sanctity of prayer and his desire to purify his intentions.
It does. And there's a similar story about another companion who was distracted by the date palms in his garden during prayer. He too felt a pang of guilt and decided to donate his garden, recognizing that his attachment to it had interfered with his worship.
It seems like these distractions were seen as a test of their devotion, and they felt a need to make amends for allowing their focus to waver. It wasn't about punishing themselves, but about reaffirming their commitment to God and removing any obstacles that stood in their way.
Exactly. It wasn't about material loss. It was about spiritual purification. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the things we cherish most in this world, even seemingly innocent things, like a garden or a striped garment, can become barriers between us and God.
It's like they were constantly striving to refine their intentions, to ensure that their hearts were fully present in their prayers. It's a beautiful lesson for us today as we navigate a world filled with distractions.
It is. And these stories emphasize that maintaining focus during prayer is an ongoing struggle, and even the most devout individuals can be susceptible to distractions.
It's encouraging to know that even the Prophet and his companions face these challenges. It makes it feel a little less daunting for the rest of us.
Exactly. It humanizes the struggle and reminds us that it's okay to falter as long as we strive to return to a state of focus and presence, recognizing that prayer is a journey, not a destination.
Okay, so we've learned about dealing with external distractions.
Yeah.
What about internal distractions? Like those random thoughts that pop into our heads during prayer, pulling us away from the present moment. Does the Muwatta address that as well?
While the Muwatta doesn't explicitly address that specific issue, the overall emphasis on focus and intention during prayer suggests that managing internal distractions is just as important as dealing with external ones.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all about cultivating that inner stillness, that space where we can truly connect with the divine, free from the chatter of our minds.
Exactly. And the Muwatta, in its exploration of prayer, then moves on to a topic that often causes confusion or forgetfulness: what to do if you accidentally say the taslim, the concluding salutation after only 2 units of prayer.
Oh, I've definitely done that before. It's that moment of panic when you realize you've ended the prayer too early and you're not sure how to fix it. What does Muwatta say you should do?
It offers a clear and reassuring solution involving something called prostrations of forgetfulness.
Ah, yes, I've heard of those, but I'm not entirely sure when they're supposed to be done. Can you break it down for me?
Of course, prostrations of forgetfulness are essentially 2 extra prostrations that are performed to compensate for errors made during prayer, whether it's adding something extra or omitting something essential. It's a way of acknowledging the mistake and restoring balance to the prayer.
So in the case of accidentally saying the taslim after 2 units, you would do the prostrations of forgetfulness to make up for that mistake.
Exactly. It's like a spiritual reset button, a way of acknowledging that you've stumbled, but you're committed to finishing the prayer correctly.
And the Muwatta actually shares a story about the Prophet Muhammad himself doing this right.
It does. And it's a beautiful reminder that even the most perfect human being can experience moments of forgetfulness, and there's a prescribed way to rectify those errors.
I love these stories that humanize the Prophet. They make him feel more relatable, more accessible. Okay, so tell me the story. I'm eager to hear how the Prophet handled this situation.
Well, according to the Muwatta, the Prophet once accidentally ended the prayer after only 2 units. One of his companions, Dhul Yadain, noticed the error and gently inquired if the prayer had been shortened or if the Prophet had forgotten. The Prophet confirmed that he had indeed forgotten, and then, with grace and humility, proceeded to complete the remaining 2 units of prayer.
So he didn't let the mistake fluster him. He simply acknowledged it and carried on completing the prayer as it should be done.
Exactly. And after finishing the prayer, he remained seated and performed 2 prostrations of forgetfulness, demonstrating the proper way to rectify the error.
Wow. So the Prophet himself made mistakes during prayer. That's comforting to know. Makes me feel less self-conscious about my own moments of forgetfulness.
It's a beautiful reminder that we're all human, and even the most pious among us can make mistakes. The important thing is to acknowledge those mistakes, seek guidance on how to correct them, and carry on with sincerity and humility.
Okay, so the prostrations of forgetfulness are done after the prayer is finished.
In this case, yes. But the Muwatta emphasizes that the timing of the prostrations of forgetfulness depends on the nature of the mistake.
What do you mean? Are there different times to perform them?
Yes. If you omit something from the prayer, like forgetting to bow or prostrate, the prostrations of forgetfulness are performed before the taslim, the concluding salutation. But if you add something extra, like an extra unit of prayer, then the prostrations are done after the taslim.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like you're either making up for something missed or acknowledging something added. It's all about restoring balance and completing the prayer correctly, even with the imperfections of human memory.
Precisely. It's a beautiful system of checks and balances, ensuring that our prayers are performed with the utmost care and attention, even when our minds falter.
And speaking of imperfect memory, what if you're unsure about how much you've prayed? Like you lose track of the units and don't know if you've done 3 or 4. What does the Muwatta say about those moments of uncertainty?
It offers very clear guidance for those moments, and the guidance comes straight from the Prophet Muhammad himself, which shows how important this issue is.
Okay, I'm ready to hear the Prophet's wisdom on this. What did he say?
He instructed that if you're unsure about the number of units you've prayed, you should pray one more unit and then perform 2 prostrations of forgetfulness before the taslim.
So basically err on the side of caution and add an extra unit just in case. It's like a spiritual safety net, ensuring that you fulfilled your obligation even when doubt creeps in.
Exactly. It's better to do a little extra than to risk having prayed too little. And the prostrations of forgetfulness serve to rectify any potential imbalance, acknowledging the uncertainty and seeking God's forgiveness for any unintentional shortcomings.
Okay, so 1 extra unit and then prostrations of forgetfulness before the taslim.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, I'm curious, did any of the companions have any additional advice on dealing with uncertainty during prayer? Did they offer any practical tips or insights?
Yes, they did. Abdullah ibn Umar, who, as we've seen, was known for his meticulous attention to detail, suggested that you should try to estimate what you think you might have missed and repeat that portion of the prayer.
So, like, if you're not sure if you did 3 or 4 units, you could repeat the 3rd unit just to be safe.
Exactly. And then after completing the prayer, he advised performing 2 prostrations of forgetfulness from the sitting position, acknowledging the uncertainty and seeking God's mercy.
It's about combining careful consideration with the prescribed ritual to ensure the completeness of your prayer, even when doubt clouds your mind.
Precisely. It's a beautiful blend of practicality and spirituality, demonstrating that Islam is a religion that caters to the human condition, acknowledging our imperfections, and offering solutions that are both logical and spiritually enriching.
It's amazing how the Muwatta provides solutions for all these different scenarios that can arise during prayer. It's like a comprehensive guide to navigating the complexities of worship, ensuring that we perform our prayers with the utmost care and attention.
It is. It's a testament to the comprehensiveness of Islamic jurisprudence and its attentiveness to the practicalities of religious practice. It's not just about abstract principles, it's about providing guidance for real-life situations, recognizing that we're not perfect beings, but we're striving for excellence in our worship.
Okay, so we've covered forgetting to say the opening takbir, raising your head before the imam, accidentally saying the taslim too early and being unsure about how many units you've prayed. Any other common prayer mishaps addressed in the Muwatta? I'm feeling much more prepared for any eventuality now.
There's one more scenario that's often a result of forgetfulness or perhaps a bit of overzealousness. What to do if you accidentally stand up after completing the prayer or after only 2 units thinking there's another unit to pray.
Oh, I've done that too.
Yeah.
You're so relieved to have finished the prayer and then your brain goes on autopilot and you stand up only to realize, wait, I'm done. It's a funny feeling, a mix of relief and, oops, you did it again.
It is. And the Muwatta, ever the reliable guide, provides clarity on how to handle the situation gracefully. It recounts a story of the Prophet Muhammad himself accidentally standing up after 2 units of prayer. When he realized his mistake, he simply performed 2 prostrations of forgetfulness and then said the taslim again, signaling the true end of the prayer.
Okay, so prostrations of forgetfulness again. These seem to be the go-to solution for a lot of prayer-related errors. It's like they're a built-in mechanism for course correction, a way of acknowledging our human fallibility and seeking God's mercy.
They are. And in this particular scenario, the prostrations acknowledge the extra standing and reset the prayer to its concluding point, ensuring that the prayer is complete and performed correctly.
Got it. But what if you've already started reciting in that extra unit that you accidentally stood up for? Like you've gone beyond just standing up, you started the recitation. What happens then?
Imam Malik, always attuned to the nuances of practice, offers his opinion on this specific situation. He states that if you've already bowed in that extra unit, you should return to a sitting position and not perform any prostrations at that point.
Okay, so you don't interrupt the flow of the prayer with prostrations in that moment. But you don't just ignore the mistake, right?
Exactly. Imam Malik advises that after completing the prayer and saying the taslim, you should perform 2 prostrations of forgetfulness, acknowledging the extra movements and seeking God's forgiveness.
So it's a slightly different procedure, but the prostrations of forgetfulness are still there to rectify the mistake, ensuring that the prayer is concluded correctly and with the right intention.
It's like a safety net, isn't it? A way of ensuring that our prayers are accepted despite our human imperfections.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much detail and attention is given to these seemingly small aspects of prayer. It really highlights the importance of performing the prayer correctly with awareness and mindfulness.
It does, and it speaks to the meticulousness of Islamic scholarship and its concern for upholding the integrity of religious practice. It's a reminder that prayer is not just about going through the motions, it's about cultivating a state of presence, humility, and devotion.
Okay, we've explored so much about the nuances of prayer, from the call to prayer to the concluding salutation and all the little hiccups that can happen along the way. Is there anything else in the Muwatta that we should cover in our deep dive? I'm eager to see what other gems we can unearth.
There's one more section that's particularly fascinating, and it's about the concept of Ihsan, which is often translated as excellence or spiritual virtue. It's about taking our worship beyond the mere fulfillment of outward requirements and infusing it with inner awareness and presence.
Ihsan. I've heard that term before, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. Can you elaborate?
Yeah.
I'm ready to go beyond the mechanics of prayer and explore its deeper dimensions.
It's a beautiful concept that's hard to fully capture in words, but essentially it's about striving for excellence in our worship. Not just fulfilling the outward requirements, but cultivating inner awareness and presence. It's about praying as if you see God, and even if you don't see him, knowing that he sees you.
Wow, that's powerful. It's about recognizing the constant presence of the divine, even in the midst of our daily lives, and bringing that awareness into our prayers is no longer just a ritual. It's a living, breathing encounter with the divine.
It is, and the Muwatta beautifully illustrates this concept through a series of stories about the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, showcasing their remarkable acts of generosity and devotion, often inspired by their commitment to prayer.
I'm eager to hear these stories. They sound incredibly inspiring, and I'm always eager to learn from the examples of those who embodied the true spirit of Islam.
They are, and they offer a glimpse into the transformative power of prayer and its ability to shape our character and our actions, extending its reach beyond the prayer rug and into the world around us.
Okay, let's dive into these stories of Ihsan. I'm ready to be inspired.
Let's revisit the story of Abu Talha and his garden, the one who was distracted by the pigeon and ended up donating his beloved garden. Remember him?
Yes. His story really struck me. It seemed like a pretty drastic reaction at first, but I'm starting to understand the deeper meaning behind his actions.
It wasn't just about getting rid of a distraction. It was about recognizing that his attachment to the garden had become a barrier between him and God, a subtle form of idolatry.
So it was more about purifying his intentions and removing anything that might hinder his devotion, even something as seemingly harmless as a garden.
Exactly. And the Muwatta doesn't dwell on the material loss. Instead, it highlights Abu Talha's sincere desire to please God, his willingness to sacrifice something precious for the sake of spiritual growth.
It's a beautiful example of how prayer can lead to profound self-reflection, a willingness to let go of those things that we cling to, even those things that bring us joy and comfort if they become obstacles on our path to God.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the things we hold most dear can become distractions from what truly matters, and that true devotion involves letting go of those attachments, even if it's painful.
And the Muwatta then shares another story that highlights the transformative power of faith, its ability to inspire acts of extraordinary selflessness and generosity. It's the story of a man who was so moved by the Prophet's teachings on charity that he decided to donate his most prized possession, his horse.
Wow, a horse. That must have been a significant sacrifice back then. Horses were so essential for transportation and livelihood. It's like donating your car today.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But this man's generosity wasn't about impressing others or seeking recognition. It was a spontaneous outpouring of his faith, a recognition that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the fulfillment of God's commands.
It's a reminder that when we prioritize our spiritual well-being, when we align our hearts with God's will, material things lose their grip on us. We become free to give generously, knowing that true abundance comes from God, not from our possessions.
Beautifully put. And the Muwatta doesn't just focus on these grand gestures of sacrifice. It also emphasizes the importance of everyday acts of kindness and generosity, the small but significant ways in which we can embody Ihsan in our interactions with others.
Right, like giving charity to those in need, helping our neighbors, and treating everyone with compassion and respect regardless of their background or beliefs. These acts might seem small, but they have a ripple effect, spreading kindness and creating a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. It's about integrating the principles of Ihsan into our daily lives, making excellence and virtue a habit rather than an occasional act. It's about embodying the spirit of Islam in all that we do, not just during our designated times of prayer.
It's about living a life that reflects the beauty and compassion of our faith, a life that radiates kindness and inspires others to do the same.
And the Muwatta offers practical examples of how to integrate this principle of prioritizing loved ones in our acts of service.
You mentioned a story about a woman who sought the Prophet's guidance on how to best use her wealth.
Yes, she wanted to ensure her generosity was aligned with God's will.
What did the Prophet advise her to do?
He told her to start by giving charity to her relatives, specifically those closest to her.
It's such a simple yet profound concept. It's a reminder that charity begins at home, nurturing the bonds within our families and communities before extending outwards.
It's like building a strong foundation of love and support that can then reach out and embrace the wider world.
These stories of Ihsan paint such a vivid picture of the early Muslims' dedication to living their faith. It's like prayer wasn't just a ritual, but a catalyst for transforming their hearts and their actions.
And the Muwatta doesn't shy away from acknowledging the challenges we face in our pursuit of spiritual excellence.
Right. We were talking about Rhea earlier, showing off or performing acts of worship to impress others rather than for God's sake.
It's a subtle trap that can easily ensnare us, especially in a world that often values outward appearances over inner sincerity.
The Muwatta cautions against this, emphasizing that true worship should be solely for God's pleasure, free from any desire for recognition or praise.
Imagine standing before God on the day of judgment and presenting your deeds only to find them empty because they were driven by a desire for worldly validation rather than sincere devotion.
It's a sobering thought. It makes you realize the importance of constantly checking our intentions, purifying our hearts, and ensuring our actions are aligned with our love for God.
It's a lifelong journey of self-reflection and refinement, constantly striving to strip away the layers of ego and self-interest that can cloud our worship.
And it's a journey that requires patience and perseverance, particularly when faced with life's inevitable challenges.
The Muwatta doesn't just paint a rosy picture of faith. It acknowledges the storms we encounter, the trials and tribulations that test our resolve and push us to the edge of our limits.
Right. Life isn't always easy, and it's natural to feel overwhelmed, discouraged, even despairing at times.
But the Muwatta reminds us that true faith isn't about the absence of difficulty. It's about facing those difficulties with grace, resilience, and unwavering trust in God's plan.
It shares inspiring stories of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, enduring persecution, hardship, and loss. Yet their faith never wavered. They found strength and solace in their connection with God, drawing upon their prayers as a source of guidance and comfort.
It's a powerful reminder that our challenges can become opportunities for growth moments that deepen our dependence on God and refine our character.
It's about recognizing that even in the darkest of times, God's presence is with us, guiding us, supporting us, and carrying us through.
And the Muwatta concludes with a powerful reminder of the ultimate purpose of prayer, to draw closer to God.
It's so easy to get lost in the details of the ritual, the precise movements, the proper recitations, that we forget the heart of the matter, the essence of prayer.
It's about cultivating a relationship with the divine, a connection that transcends the physical act of prayer and permeates every aspect of our lives.
It's about recognizing God's presence in every breath we take, every step we make, every act of kindness we offer, and every challenge we face.
It's about living in a state of constant awareness, recognizing that God is closer to us than our own jugular vein, always watching over us, guiding us, and loving us.
This deep dive into Muwatta Imam Malik Book 3 Prayer has been a truly enriching journey. I feel like I've gained a deeper understanding of the nuances of prayer, the importance of intention, and the profound impact it can have on our lives.
It's been a privilege exploring these timeless principles with you. The Muwatta offers us a glimpse into the hearts and minds of the early Muslims, their unwavering devotion and their commitment to living their faith with excellence.
And it reminds us that their legacy lives on in our own hearts and in our own prayers. May we strive to embody the spirit of Ihsan in our worship and in our lives, bringing excellence and virtue to all that we do.
And may our prayers be a source of peace, guidance, and ever-deepening connection with the divine.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Muwatta Imam Malik Book 3 prayer. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
Until next time, may your hearts be filled with the light of faith and your lives reflect the beauty of Islam.